The Asian carp threat, how to stop the carp from passing through the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal and into Lake Michigan. At a town hall meeting held today in Muskegon, political and environmental leaders met with the public to discuss options for dealing with an Asian carp invasion. We discuss what's at stake and the cost to state sport fishing and tourism on West Michigan Week. Thank you for joining us on this edition of West Michigan Week. On our panel, Pete Daly. You're not Carol Valade.
No, but I'll have to do.
Pete Daly with the Grand Rapids Business Journal. Thank you for joining us. Holly Hughes, Representative Holly Hughes, Republican from Montague. And then we have Dave Clapp with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources and Dan O'Keefe with the Michigan Sea Grant and MSU Extension. Well, this has been an ongoing problem, a debate, and the video itself tells the story. Dan, tell us what we're dealing with as the viewers take a look at this video.
Well, this has really captured a lot of people's attention. The silver carp in particular are a species that jumps out of the water. I've personally seen them jump 8 feet straight out of the water. And there aren't a lot of other fish that do that. They actually jump when they're scared, which is especially a big problem for boaters, because if you're traveling in the wake of another boat, if you're following another boat in a busy waterway, or if you're water skiing, you're in the line of danger here. And people have had their jaws fractured by these fish. They've been knocked unconscious. It's really actually lucky that no one's been killed yet. They're incredibly strong fish, and they pack a real punch.
I mean, this is ridiculous to look at. Those aren't porpoise out in the river. Those are fish, and they are getting close to, well, they're on the doorstep, as people say, to borrow the cliche. DNA has been found above the electric fences in the canal, in Lake Michigan, or is it the Calumet?
Silver carp DNA was actually found in Calumet Harbor, which is a harbor on Lake Michigan. So the DNA evidence is there to suggest that they've probably made it into Lake Michigan. The bighead carp, another species that we're concerned with, a live bighead carp was caught just a couple miles from Lake Michigan in the Calumet waterway area.
So while we do studies that won't come back until 2015 and 2016, we don't have time for this, do we?
Exactly. And that's why we've had a number of resolutions in the House. I've had one myself. I'm on the Natural Resources Committee on the House side, and luckily my senator, Senator Hansen, is chair of Natural Resources on the Senate side. And so I proposed House Resolution number 15 that asks for the U.S. government to expedite and fund the Great Lakes and Mississippi River Basin Inter-Basin Study, and to speed it up, not to wait till 2015, because otherwise with finding DNA on the other side of the electric weirs, it may become a study of non-action rather than action. And so we feel that it needs to be addressed now rather than later. We're worried about a number of things, not only on the Chicago side with electric weirs that, by the way, are of the same, even though they installed some about a month ago, they are of the same voltage as the ones that have failed before, and Mr. O'Keefe can attest to that. But also we're worried about Asian carp getting in other ways through lakes and streams. It's very important that we let our friends and family know, don't dump the bait in the lake. It's really difficult to tell the difference between the different minnows, regular minnows, and carp. And so it's important that you do not dump your bait in the lake. And it's really tempting to do that after you're done fishing. So,
Dave, what are the fish that we're talking about here specifically? If we break them down, there's
quite a few species actually that are classified as Asian carps, but we're primarily concerned with 4 species: the bighead carp, the silver carp, the grass carp, and the black carp, and even more so the first 2 that I mentioned, the bighead and the silver carp. They're the 2 that are progressing up the Chicago waterway system. However, as we've been discussing, the Chicago waterway system is only one pathway, so any of those species and others can get through by truck transfer, bait bait bucket dumping, a lot of different pathways that we're concerned about. So.
We were showing some graphics right now about the different sizes here. The big head, how big do these species get?
The big head is the biggest one of the ones that we're worried about. It can get up to 100 pounds. Eats a significant amount of plankton, which is one of the major ecological concerns in the area here. They're potentially going to eat food that would normally be eaten by young game fish, and so we're very concerned about that one. The silver carp is the one that we talked about jumping. It has a tends to jump a lot, and bigger schools of those fish. They don't get as big as the big head carp do. They get to be probably the maximum size of about 60 pounds, and average what people would see might be 10, 15 pounds, something on that order. So those are the two ones that we're primarily concerned with. The grass carp gets to the same kinds of sizes. It can get up close to 100 pounds. That one eats rooted vegetation in lakes, and we've actually have collected grass carp in Michigan waters in the St. Joe River and the Muskegon River. Probably either escapees from other states that allow stocking, or again illegal plants that people have put into their lakes to try to control vegetation. So.
Pete, you've been following this extensively, and you've written a column this last week in the Business Journal. You're also an avid fisherman yourself.
I try.
You do some scuba diving.
Yeah,
you look at this, and what do you see here? What's taking place when you take a look at society, the political aspect of things?
Well, my fear is that the sport fishing industry in Lake Michigan, which is huge. I mean, I've spoken to an awful lot of charter boat captains along the shore, and I'd hate to see something happen. You know, they kind of replaced. We used to have commercial fishing on a large scale 100 years ago, and they're sort of the replacement for that now. I think I've read that the whole sport fishing industry in the Great Lakes is several $1 billion.
$7.5 billion around there. $7.5 billion. It would not only environmentally but economically. It's just huge for the state of Michigan. It's important that we get this threat under control.
Yeah. It's not just Michigan, though.
Right.
You're seeing governors from across the Midwest, the Great Lakes states, getting together. Indiana seems to be very proactive in some of the things that it's doing with the tributaries. Is Illinois on board here? That's my political question of the day for you, Holly. What is taking place with the Obama administration, the connections with somebody who is from Illinois, who lived in Chicago? Is this an economic issue? Is it a political issue? What are we seeing there?
It's definitely an economic issue. $4 billion it means to the state of Illinois if we were to close those locks. And so, yeah, I think it helps them to have connections with the current administration in Washington. But I think it's also imperative that all the Great Lakes states join together. That's why we've asked the federal government to speed up this study, so that, because it is a federal issue, because you have to have all those states together. We're only one piece of the puzzle. We're a big piece of the puzzle, but we need to join together and make sure that happens. I've proposed to our chairman, Foster, of the Natural Resources, that we take a visit and look at the electrical weirs. Mr. O'Keefe can tell you about the fencing down there that's way too big to hold out any of the current little minnows that can swim in and out of it's essentially chain link fence. We need to make sure that happens. We've also had a proposal for our committee to go and actually witness these fish in the lake, because we're not seeing them up here right now. Threats coming, but I think you really need to take on the hands-on approach, and I would like our committee to actually go and go down to Bath and in Illinois and see what's going on and what we're really talking about.
But what do the politicians there say? Obviously, they've seen it in their rivers. Why aren't it, and maybe I'm wrong here, is there the same determination that you're seeing out of politicians in Illinois as you see in the other Great Lakes states to stop this?
I call on our fellow legislators in Illinois to take this seriously. this not only impacts their state by just $4 billion, but if you include all of the Great Lakes states, us $7.5 billion, I'm not sure what the amounts are for each of the states along the lake, but this is an international issue as well, because Canada, actually we have transition of some of this carp going through the Great Lakes, and as it was pointed out earlier, Canada stopped some trucks from actually entering Canada trying to transport some of this carp, and it's a big economic impact. It's more than $4 billion. It may only be $4 billion to Illinois, but it's a lot more to all of us. And in this kind of economy, every bit of that counts. And we can't threaten the rest of our economy by allowing one state to say, oh, we're going to hold out, because they already have them and they're not as worried as we are about it, it seems like. We need to join together as one country, one region, and make sure that we stop this invasive species. So it's time for us to all come together and stop the politics of trying to just protect one small part of our economy.
The town hall meeting, speaking of coming together, what were the results today? I know that there were some electronic devices, because this town hall meeting essentially was about, okay, worst case scenario, correct? Was that what this was about?
That's part of what we posed to the audience, and we had an audience response system, and we asked, we were sitting on the shores of Muskegon Lake, we said, if silver carp is caught tomorrow in Muskegon Lake, what would your preferred course of action be? And we know at this point there would be a huge outcry from people in U.S., Canada, all around the Great Lakes. It would be a big story. It's interesting to note that bighead carp were already found in Lake Erie years back before this was a big story, and people didn't pay much attention. If that happened now, it would be a big deal, and there would be a lot of pressure to act quickly. So we asked people what their preferred course of action was, and we gave them some different options. The two that have consistently come out as the top options have been either to do removal netting, basically have biologists and possibly commercial fishermen go out and set a lot of gear and attempt to find out if there are more carp there, and if there are, remove them. That has the advantage of not killing all the native fish as well. And the other option that has come out highly is to take a measured approach and assess things before we jump to more drastic options, one of which is rotenone. Rotenone is a fish poison that kills all the fish, including the native predator fish that could potentially eat small carp. So that would definitely be a drastic measure, and that's consistently come out as the lowest of those options when we've done these pollings around the state.
Is that a case where you restock later?
Well, it takes...
Once you close off the waterway, I mean,
but I think what was proven today, we actually had a nurse who came to our meeting this morning, and if it kills fish, it can hurt people as well.
I would
be my concern.
About rotenone in the Great Lakes. I would think a lot of people would be.
Well, yeah, you've got the water supply, and if it kills everything else around it, how does that help our fishing industry, our sports fishing industry? Yeah. Not to mention the health of the lake and those around it, and how long? Maybe you can answer. How long does it take to recover it when you do something like that?
Quite a long time, and a lot of the fish that we're talking about couldn't really be stocked, so we'd have to wait for them to naturally come back on their own. Some of the, there's a good walleye population in Muskegon Lake. We could obviously stock walleye and try to rebuild that population. Again, to get it back to where it was, though, would be quite a few years, and up to 10 years maybe. Before.
And I asked you what you said each scenario, depending on where you were in the state, would be different, right. And there's different teams you said that would address this, and what was your best scenario? And I was happy to hear that the chemical is actually a smaller part of what your plan may be for Muskegon. Is that right?
Yeah, and more of a last resort. We do in the plan. We try to lay out scenarios to estimate cost and effects around the state for different types of systems. So we have scenarios where we look at costs and treatments on the St. Joseph River, Muskegon Lake, and those are representative of some bigger lakes or bigger rivers in the state here. So we have those in place, but they are, the rotenone treatments are more of a last resort and a very expensive one. I think I mentioned at the meeting today that I don't have the exact number with me, but the estimate was probably on the order of $750,000 maybe to treat Muskegon Lake. So it'd be a very expensive undertaking. It would
In a lot of different ways.
And a lot of fish. We'd have a long recovery period following that. So we didn't want to take any options off the table because depending on the fish population that might be impacted, we might go to an extreme kind of treatment. But they're definitely one of our last resorts. That chemical treatment would be a last resort.
And your preferred is the netting and...
Netting, there's some alternative technologies we talked about today that we could implement, and more of those are being developed every day. But we could try to keep fish in. Let's try to put some kind of a passive barrier in place in the Muskegon system to keep fish from moving around. A lot of netting options in Illinois right now. They're contracting with commercial fishermen to try to bring the population numbers down. We obviously couldn't completely remove a population of carp once it's established by fishing, but we could hopefully reduce it so it would slow its spread into other parts of the state. So.
And predators?
Predators is another potential option. Yeah, we could stock more predators. The predator option also involves trying to make sure we have healthy fish populations in our state, because if you have a healthy system, it's less likely to be invaded, and that's really a preventative measure, and that's part of our plan is prevention, and that's
I
one of
wanted
our
to
options.
ask Dan, down in Illinois, what has the state of Illinois done in those rivers where the silver carp have had an impact on recreational boating? But tell us a little bit about that impact, and then what have you seen them attempting to do about it?
Well, the fisheries down there started out a little different, and the boating too. They did have a lot of boating, but probably not on the same scale we do in the Great Lakes. The fisheries, a lot of them were commercial, so the commercial fishermen saw their native fish decline, and what has happened in Illinois is they've been supportive of developing markets for Asian carp. And a lot of people misunderstand this scenario where we have a lot of fish in the river. It seems quite obvious that we should just take them and use them for fertilizer or pet food. The economics don't work out very well. What they're actually doing is exporting them frozen, whole, to China, where they're sold as a premium quality fish. The quality of our fish is higher than what they get in China for the same species. So they're marketing it as a wild Mississippi River fish, and it's kind of like black Angus beef. So they'll pay a higher price for it, and that's what allows the economics to work. So they've got this contract to export 30 million pounds a year now, and now the commercial fishermen are finding a good market for their fish. So they're able to put a lot of pressure on them, which is good for them. It's good for their economies, and frankly, they were hurting already because of the carp, because they lost their native fish.
But now, did the pleasure boaters down there, was that impacted?
Yeah, people have started modifying their boats with heavy-duty windshields and netting.
Because of the silver carp.
Yeah, the big head carp are bigger, but they don't jump. So
Okay.
it's the silver carp that really have changed the face of recreation down there.
Did they do anything down there in the way of trying to remove those populations?
That's where the commercial fishing comes in, and
Okay.
if you see the volume of fish down there, it's incredible. And commercial fishing's never going to get rid of them all, but there's actually a project going on with MSU Professor Brian Roth now too, that's looking at how much it will take to knock down that population. Basically, when you get fish overcrowded and in a bad situation, they want to move more as well, and there are more of them to move. So by commercial fishing, we're hoping that they'll find lower densities and they won't be moving our way as much.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, to borrow a phrase from U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, the known unknown, when we come back. we're back with more West Michigan Week as we discuss the Asian carp invasion. This is for you, Dave. The known unknown, which is, do we truly know what happens should these fish get into the open waters of the Great Lakes? Temperature, water quality. Would they swim along the lake shore to get to the tributaries where they really can breed and do well?
Right. Yeah,
What's the guess? It's guesswork at this point, right?
To a certain extent, there's been some work done that show modeling work and looking at energetics and how much food these fish take in and where they could survive and not survive. So the general consensus is they won't do well in the main basin of the Great Lakes. However, along the western Lake Michigan shoreline here, we have what are called drowned river mouth lakes with these large tributaries feeding into the lakes that are probably perfect habitat for Asian carps, and they contain some of the best resources that we have, and really a lot of them are world-class fisheries resources. So the consensus in those systems is that there's plenty of nutrients, plenty of food for these fish. The predictions are that in lots of these systems they do have the appropriate spawning habitat and the length of rivers needed to spawn in. So I think that we shouldn't underestimate their ability to establish populations in our near-shore and inshore waters. Again, the deep open areas of the Great Lakes, you're not going to see thousands of jumping silver carp like we saw before there, but in the near-shore areas, I think we have significant concerns about them. And their feeding behavior and the types of food they eat, I think Dan mentioned, they've definitely caused declines in populations of fish in the Mississippi and Illinois river systems, and they eat plankton, which is a primary food for the fish that we manage and are concerned with, and so I think there's lots of reasons to be concerned.
Realistically, how much time do we have?
Very hard to say. With any invasion, often it's been called a slow motion disaster. So between the time when you start to see a couple show up, as has already happened with bighead carp in Lake Erie, and the time that you get a huge population explosion, it could be 10 years, it could be 20 years. Ultimately, we really don't know. As with many things, it really is an unknown.
But I think people focus on the Chicago system, as we saw this spring and the late winter. There's a couple of times where we've seen truckloads of these fish in Michigan, or crossing through Michigan. So the 10-year scenario is probably about right for the Chicago migration, but a truckload of fish could come in any day and really change that timetable quite a bit, I think. So.
And what about other tributaries that are out there? It's not just going to be this one. There are other routes the fish can potentially take. True?
True, and I think people alluded a little bit to one in Indiana that connects the Wabash River, which you saw some video of how many silver carp are there, and it connects that to the Maumee River, which flows into Lake Erie. That's a big concern, and it was acted upon quickly when people realized last year that silver carp were spawning right near there. The solution was that chain link fence, which it was a quick reaction, but in the event of a big flood, there's certainly the potential for small carp to swim right through a chain link fence. And the reason, by the way, that they don't just build an earthen wall is because in the event of a 100-year flood, that would produce flooding in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So it's similar to in the Chicago situation, where simply building a wall is going to really create stormwater management issues that have to be dealt with comprehensively if we're going to get this really done in a meaningful way.
Is that the debate then with the Army Corps, that even if you do build the barrier, a permanent barrier, it's not truly permanent?
No, I think you could. The barrier that Dan's talking about was a temporary barrier to prevent adult fish from moving through that particular system. The ultimate goal is to have some kind of permanent separation. That's the best solution to this issue of having invasive species move between the two watersheds.
Hey Dan, the Corps in Chicago, are they really doing the best job they can, or are they dragging their feet, or?
Maybe I can defer that
I know that's a
question.
politically
That's a loaded question.
I don't mind loaded questions. I would prefer Illinois, and the administration in Washington, D.C. to quit being penny wise and pound foolish, because it's more than just one state and more than just one state's economy. It's important that we get a grip on this, and sooner rather than later.
Wouldn't this be a case of, you know, the way the economy is, get some construction jobs going, you can offload and then put shipments back on barges down the Mississippi River? Is that the idea? Or up?
There's a lot of ways to handle this, and the way we're handling right now is wrong. So we're trying to make sure that this is sped up and we get some real solutions really fast.
All right. Well, the town hall meeting is today. They'll be moving throughout the state. On the panel, Pete Daly, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Dave Clapp from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, Representative Holly Hughes Montague, thank you so much, and Dan O'Keefe with the Michigan Sea Grant and MSU Extension. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us this week. We'll see you next week on West Michigan Week.